Did you know that if you keep talking about ghosts, the more active they become? Well, my roommates and I found this out the hard way. I come from a background of religious believers, and I, myself, am one along with my roommates. We believe that there are in fact things on this earth we cannot explain, along with an afterlife. Now, a few years ago I moved in with my roommate. We'll call her Casey. I moved in with Casey because her cousin at the time moved out and back home to try and save money. I knew Casey since I was a little girl, but we never got close enough until I moved in. A few nights after moving in, Casey told me about the spirit that was attached to her cousin Abby. While I believed in things, I could not explain the concept of a ghost attaching itself to someone, and seemed a bit far out there for me, but I respected her and listened anyway. She then proceeded to tell me about weird things that happened and how the strange occurrences in the house stopped when Abby moved in. Fast forward a few months and Abby moves back into our little condo due to not getting along with the people she was living with. Well, when she moved back in, strange things started happening. Strange noises or lights would be on when we thought we turned them off. Nothing too noticeable or malevolent, but odd all the same. Now, at the time, we each had a dog and also shared the space with our indoor cat, so most of the time we pretty much just blamed the weird noises on our animals. One night, Abby and I found ourselves alone on a cloudy fall night and gotten on the subject of our past ghost encounters. We let the dogs outside for a while before the rain was supposed to roll in. Later on, Abby said her contacts started getting uncomfortable and that she needed to go upstairs and take them out. Our little condo had stairs right when you walked into the entryway. If you walked upstairs, it was like a big square. You would find my room to the right of you, and if you turned right again, there was a little bathroom that connected to my roommate's vanity area and then her room. Turn right again, and you are back out in the hallway that connects to the stairs. I know all these details seem a little excessive, but it is important to know the layout of the house for the rest of the story to make sense. I followed Abby upstairs as we kept talking about our experiences. I was standing in my doorway, and she was standing in the room opposite of me, fighting with her contacts. The wall to my left was an interior wall in my room that had 4 mirrors hanging in a decorative square. I can flat out say that there was no wind outside and all the TVs were off and the windows were all shut in our condo at the time. She was just finishing a story when all of a sudden on the wall to my left, with enough force to knock all of my mirrors crooked, bang, 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 right next to me in the center of the mirrors. We both looked wide-eyed at each other and bolted down the stairs with my friend screaming, "I'm sorry, it's my fault," over and over, and me yelling, "It's the cat, oh my God, it's the damn cat, it can't be anything else." Me knowing full well that it wasn't the damn cat, and right when we got downstairs, the cat was asleep in the armchair. How it stayed asleep through all of the noise and chaos, I have no idea. We huddled on the couch for the rest of the night, us both being too paranoid to sleep. A few weeks later, Casey, Abby, and I were all talking about some weird experiences which were happening almost daily, and we got on the subject of where the ghosts like to reside most accordingly to Abby. Abby told me that it would pace back and forth in my friend's vanity area, and especially liked my walk-in closet, which used to be in her old room. I later on told whatever it was that it was welcome, since Abby did verify that it was benign in nature. That doesn't mean it didn't have a temper, if provoked. A few weeks later, a friend came over for the first time. This friend, who I will mention now, was a complete non-believer in the paranormal. She sometimes liked to taunt the unseen, so out of respect for whatever resided in our condo and my own sanity, I told her not to say anything stupid or to taunt whatever resided in our home. We were alone at the time and didn't expect anyone until late that evening. Later on, I found myself on the subject of the weird activity in the house. I was sitting on my bed, which was tucked in the far right corner of my room, and my friend was standing at the foot of my bed, and about 2 feet behind her I had a cabinet that was about 6 feet high. I had several decorative figurines on the top of it, one of which was a rather heavy angel figurine music box that was about 6 inches high and about 4 inches wide. This thing was not a light figurine by any means. The cabinet had a rich engraved top on it, about 4 inches away from the edge of the cabinet, and the angel figurine had little legs on the bottom of it, making the following events extremely odd, because it was impossible for that figurine to fall down. My friend, being a complete jackass, proceeded to say, "Kiss my ass, ghost," against my wishes, and well, right as she said this, my angel figurine flew off the top of the cabinet and hit her square in the left butt cheek. We both just looked at each other wide-eyed, and as she bent over to pick up the angel figurine, a little wooden bird I had on the cabinet flew off and hit her in the head, just to make sure she got the point, I think. We both got spooked, but just chuckled, and the bruise she had on her butt cheek was proof enough to her that there really was something more out there. The girl really must have pissed off whatever it was, because right when I said goodbye to her and closed the front door, wham! All the cabinet doors in the kitchen slammed open and the light turned on. I nearly crapped myself and slowly went to investigate what happened, while apologizing for the actions of my dumb friend. I quickly closed the doors and ran upstairs, locking myself in my room until my roommates got home. My parents heard these stories on almost a daily basis and grew extremely concerned about how consumed my friends and I were by these experiences. They advised us that it would be best to leave the ghost stories and videos alone, at least until things settled down. I told my roommates about this, and we all agreed to let the subject alone to see if the activity calmed down. For the remainder of our time in the condo and the time in the other house we moved into, we rarely ever discussed our past paranormal experiences. The activity ceased, and to this day, I rarely ever discuss my past paranormal experiences. The advice my parents gave us worked for us, and to this day I wonder, how did my parents find out about this trick themselves? About 6 years ago, when my cousin, we'll call him James, was 15 and I was 7, our parents left us to go to a wedding. They trusted him enough to babysit me for a while so they could get to the wedding on time. It was more of the parents' friends, so we really didn't have to come, and it seemed cheaper to leave us at home. It was sometime in the fall, maybe the first week or so of November. He and I were playing games when there was scratching at the door. It was loud and animal-like. Something or someone wanted to get in. James had gotten up and walked over to the door to look at who it was, only to have the door kicked. It was like something wanted to break the door down. James had started to get nervous, and he looked at me. He was scared, and today I still don't know why. He was completely silent, and he quickly took me upstairs. It was only around 7, but it was dark, and he insisted that it was my bedtime. He tucked me into my bed and went back downstairs. This was my aunt and uncle's house, and they hunted. They had a small amount of guns, and I could tell that when James went downstairs again, he went to grab one of the guns. I started to hear loud shuffling outside in the leaves, and I called for him to come upstairs. He was up and next to my bed in less than a second with a gun in hand. I told him about what I was hearing outside and how I was scared. He looked outside and said there wasn't anything there. By then, the scratching and kicking at the door had stopped, but I was still scared by someone trying to get in and hurt us. James stayed in my room and insisted we would be okay. I fell asleep, and from what I know, so did he. At around midnight, the shuffling started again, and this time it was in the house. I immediately started to cry, and that woke James up really fast. He got up and walked out of the room and stood at the top of the stairs. Seconds later, I heard him shoot something and a scream. He ran right back into the room and blocked the door with everything he could find. I was still bawling my eyes out and barely registering what was going on. James sat on the bed next to me and tried to comfort me, but I was having none of it. I kept wailing at the top of my lungs. A minute or so later, there was scratching at the bedroom door. James grabbed his phone and called the police, with me now trying to push him so he's in front of me. I wanted to be far away from whatever that was. The scratching continued, and it seemed like hours till the police arrived. The sirens scared the thing away. I don't remember much from what happened, and James only ever tells the story when I'm not around. My name is Kyle, and I live in a haunted house in Edmonton, Alberta. Well, at least my mom and brother thought so at first, but I was a little skeptical that the house was haunted until something happened to me personally. I'm 19 now, but this story takes place when I was 17 and in the middle of August. First off, I'll list the events that happened to my mom and brother predating the event that happened to me. My mom and brother have both had cases of sleep paralysis in this house, which had never happened before we moved in. They both told me their experiences went like this. They felt like someone was slowly pushing down or sitting on their chests while they were sleeping, and would wake up with no one on top of them and being unable to speak or move, which is quite scary when you think about being helpless like that. Another thing that had happened to both my mom and brother was that while they were sleeping or on their bed, something would suddenly, out of the blue, yank off the covers and scare them. My brother had this happen to him multiple times, whereas my mom, she only had it happen to her just once. My brother also experienced the same thing as I did, but 2 weeks before I had it happen to me, and he didn't tell me this until the day I saw what he did. Now that you know the predating events, I'll tell my story. It was a weekend, and my mom had left to take my brother to soccer while I was at home in my room playing video games with my buddy. After we had stopped playing, I turned Discord off after saying goodbye to my friend. I turned my PC off and sat on my bed and opened up YouTube to watch some of my favorite YouTubers as they had just uploaded a video. While I'm laying on my bed, I hear the dishes in the sink in the kitchen down the hall start rattling, and then I begin to hear the cabinets being opened and closed. Me being stupid and thinking it's just my mom back from soccer with my brother when they just left 30 minutes ago, and soccer usually takes like 2 hours, I peek my head out of my door and look down the hall to see if it's them. To my shock, it wasn't them. Instead, I see a black mist-like shadow person standing at the end of the hall that leads into the kitchen. In complete awe of what I am seeing, I just stare at this thing, unable to process what is in front of me. After what seemed like a minute or two, I dip my head back into my room and slam the door shut and sit against it. I remembered my phone was on my bed and slid over to it and texted my mom and asked her what the F I should do. She tells me to get the hell out of the house and go stay at a friend's until she gets back home with my brother. So I do that. I look outside my door and down the hallway to see if it's clear. Lucky for me, it was. Gathering my courage and grabbing my longboard, I book it down the hall and out the door of my house, grabbing my shoes on the way and stopping on the driveway to put them on. As soon as I had them on my feet, I plopped my board on the ground and started off, almost wiping out in my hurry. And I ride over to my friend's house, who I was previously playing games with before all of this crap. Once I get there, he lets me in and we sit down and I tell him what I saw. To my surprise, he believes me and he tells me one time while he was staying the night at our house, he saw what I saw in the kitchen. While he was waking up in the middle of the night on the couch, which is in the living room, which is right next to the kitchen, he saw a dark figure standing in the kitchen, staring down the hall towards my family's rooms, including my own room. Apparently he thought it was just a dream since he was still half asleep and groggy, so he didn't say anything about it, and the next day just went on with the fun we were having. Once my mom had gotten home and we felt okay because we had a number of people with us now, we decided to enter the house. As soon as we were inside, we could tell that someone or something had been here since all the dishes in the sink were stacked on the counter beside the sink, and all of the cabinets were hanging wide open, and the dishes inside had been stacked on the counter as well. We decided not to stay the night there and stayed at our cousin's house, who lived 15 minutes away in Sherwood Park. When we got home, everything was back to normal, except the lights in the house were on. Ever since that happened, I am a firm believer of ghosts and the supernatural. This story is not about a near-death experience or something like that. As a matter of fact, I was never in danger during the event I'm about to tell you. Nonetheless, it's a disturbing memory that I will carry with me until the day I die. I grew up in a small city, the kind of place you could barely call a town if it wasn't for the sheer number of people living there. Downtown was only a couple blocks long, and in the middle of it was one of the biggest buildings in the area. It was the local movie theater named after the city. I remember going there when I was very young, about 7 years old, and watching the first Pokemon movie. It was probably nothing compared to the theaters we have nowadays, but back then it was huge for me. I really loved it. So when a few years later I heard the cinema was going out of business, I really felt sad about it. The building was sold to a religious group that used it for their services. You know the type: loud music, big crowds with their arms in the air, singing prayers, some having seizures on stage while the pastor yells through a mic. Every time I walked past the old cinema, I would see the announcements of the congregation where the movie posters would have been, and if they were in session, you could hear them singing from the other side of the street. This group owned the cinema for nearly a decade until the local government brought back the building in order to restore it as a historic landmark of the city. When this happened, I was studying construction with the intent to follow architecture or civil engineering at college, and my class was very lucky to be involved with the cinema's restoration project because 2 of our teachers were architects working on it. I will always remember the day we went to visit the old cinema. Our class was small, only a handful of students, but we were all around the same age, so we all shared childhood memories of when the cinema was operational. We ran through the corridors of the auditorium, sat in the chairs just like we did when we were little kids, and began stomping on the wooden floor with our feet, filling the entire room with the echoes of our drumming and our laughters. A little ritual of sorts everyone used to do right before the beginning of the movie. Once nostalgia time was over, we went back to the purpose of the trip and began to survey the building. We were very excited because that was a unique opportunity to go into the places we would have never been allowed to otherwise. So we made sure to check every last corner, every single room, no matter how far, no matter how obscure. The first one we found was below the stage. On one of the corners, there was a little door, not very visible, probably because it was meant for like maintenance staff only. Behind it, we found a long room filled with rusty boilers, part of the old heating system that was no longer in use. The place was a little creepy, with all of those old tanks and pipes crowding the narrow space, but what we found past them was what really started to freak us out. This room was small, very small. It was, after all, basically just leftover space behind the boilers. Yet it contrasted so much with the rest of the area around it. It may as well have been from a different place altogether. The walls were painted a light color. I think it was white, but I don't remember it very well because what really got my attention were the drawings in them. There were rainbows, a smiling sun, trees and flowers, and happy little people with smiles on their faces of dotted eyes. It was a daycare. The whole class and teacher gathered to see the discovery. We were all very confused about the strange placing of this room. Okay, we could understand the need for a place to keep the kids that were too little to be amongst the crowd during prayers, or maybe the ones of the people who worked there, but the placing was just odd. The stage was probably one of the loudest places in the auditorium during the services, and this was like right below it. So there was no way it could be a quiet place for the children. We left the boilers room and continued our tour through the theater, a little puzzled about our finding, but not giving it too much thought. Outside of the auditorium there were the bathrooms, both in terrible condition, the tickets sales booth, and a huge set of stairs that led to a mezzanine in the auditorium. Half of the seats there were totally ruined due to a water leak in the roof, and I cursed these people for not taking proper care of the building. With that part done, all that was left was the projection room on the third floor. Behind the tickets booth, there was a door that led to a spiral stair. I don't remember how tall it actually was, but it must have been over 30 feet or 10 meters of metallic steps without a single resting spot. I wasn't exactly an athlete, but I could walk several miles with no problem and rode on a bike to and from school every day. Yet, by the time I reached the top of the stairs, I was exhausted, and I wasn't the only one. All of my classmates complained about how hard it was to walk up there. After a short break to catch our breath, we moved on to explore the third floor. It was roughly a narrow passageway with a couple of divisions to form different rooms, but it was more than enough for what it was made for. The first room from the stairs was a storage deposit, probably where they kept the movies and other equipment, and except for some trash, it was mostly empty. The second room was the one we were all excited to see, the projector room. The old machine was so big that it was still there, and there were even some pieces scattered around. It was quite a piece of history, and we were all very thrilled to check it out, so no one really bothered to move on to the very last room until we were about to leave. And there we saw it again. There was a train in this one instead of a rainbow. Something was written on it in big, colorful letters, something about Christ. I can't remember. The drawings were a bit old, the paint slightly peeled from the walls, but the colors were just as cheerful as you could expect for a place where children play. My heart sank to my stomach as I came to the realization of what that place really was. The one behind the boilers probably serving the same purpose. I took notice of how isolated that room was, literally the furthest away you could possibly get from anyone else. I thought about the 3 floors of stairs and imagined what it would have been like to a child to walk all the way up, only to end up in that room, the room with the colorful train on the wall. My classmates and I exchanged horrified expressions as I knew they were thinking the same. We never visited the theater again, even though we continued with the restoration project for several months, and we never talked about those 2 rooms. Cases of molestation in a church were well known by everyone, to the point that the pedo priest is practically a cliché. But this is the kind of thing you think happens in some place far away, in another city, even in another country. You can just never imagine it happens in the very same town you live, the place where you grew up, in the very same building where you once watched a Pokemon movie when you were 7 years